I'm Toby Sparrow from Business Systems. I've been working on a new technology we've been developing for the recording of face-to-face interactions as opposed to telephone interactions. But you may be wondering why there's this session here on investigative interviewing in a conference, where commercial enterprise is here. It's not the police. So I just thought I'd put that into context before I introduce Gavin from the Investigative Interviewing Research Group, or the ERG. About 6 months ago, my wife and I went away for a long weekend, and we left our 17-year-old son in charge of the house for the weekend. Thought that'd be a chance for him to show some responsibility. We came back late on a Sunday night, and the first thing that struck us was that the house was absolutely immaculate. And it wasn't immaculate when we left. So, of course, huge alarm bells went off. And so what did we do? Well, we put our investigative skills brought them to bear. And in my case, that was a blend of Inspector Morse, Taggart, the Bill. And my wife's a bit more of a Miss Marple. And actually, the poor kid, when he woke up, he was guilty. Before he'd even spoken to us, he was guilty. And all we had to do was prove it. Now, the purpose of that little anecdote is that I think it rings true with a lot of us, that is probably where we get our investigative interviewing skills from. It's what we're exposed to, plus a little bit of experience from our home lives. And then we bring those into work, and we have some real investigative interviewing to do sometimes. Sometimes it's at the serious end when things aren't going right, and we've got disciplinary hearings, we've got grievances and tribunals. Some of the people I've been speaking to this morning, we're talking about actually quite big, major cases. I was talking to one commercial organization who deals with kidnappings to do with their brand protection, and sort of large cases of fraud. And we are now investigators. Gavin is a guy who has made a science out of investigation. He's an ex-policeman himself. And this is a great opportunity for Gavin to share with us some of those skills which we might be able to bring to bear in our common workplace. Okay, so with that, I'm going to introduce Gavin Oxford.
First of all, can I just say a huge thank you to both Tracy and to Toby and to Business Systems for inviting me along today to talk to you. Normally I would talk to an audience, not like yourself, but normally students in nice rows. This feels a bit like being at the Brits this morning. So this is quite unusual for me, especially to a business group as well. So I hope that what I can pass on to you will be of use to you in your normal day-to-day kind of lives. Toby mentioned about the organisation on the bottom right-hand corner there, the ERG. Only a Scotsman could come out with something like ERG, couldn't they? The International Investigative Interviewing Research Group. When I left the police in 2004, I was in the Royal Air Force Police for 22 years, specialising normally in family-related crime, domestic abuse, child rapes, and then going ahead and interviewing the suspected offenders. At that point, I always thought, why is it that academics always think they know what they're talking about and try and tell us, as the real practitioners, what to do? And then, of course, I moved across and became an academic, and I thought, I wish blooming police officers would listen to us about what we're actually telling them. And what we decided to do, a colleague, senior police officer in Norway and I, Trond Mikkelbust, we decided to form this organisation to try and bring the academics and practitioners together to try and have research-based practice and practice-based research. It seems to be working extremely well. Business Systems are now one of our main sponsors for the organisation. They can see how they can help us and we can help them in this organisation. And we now have about 450 members worldwide in about 24 or 25 countries now. So it seems to be something that's picking up very, very well. And what I'd like to really go through this morning, just for about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, is just to give you a background of kind of interrogation models, investigative interviewing, why we moved away from interrogation models in this country over to the more investigative interviewing side of things. I'll then look at a little bit about body language and lie detection, because I'd like to pose a scenario to you. How many people have been through customs recently? With nothing to declare, of course. And how many times have you gone through and immediately looked the other way so that the customs officer didn't look at you, and you automatically felt extremely guilty? Many, yeah, quite a few of us, yeah. And I think that's one of the myths, that if you look at the person, they're going to look at you and think, you're guilty, and pull you over for a search. And actually what happens if you look away, they think you're guilty and pull you over for a search. So hopefully I'm going to go through a little bit about some of the myths of lie detection, nonverbal communication, and how it's actually quite often misunderstood by a lot of people. I'll then say a little bit about how we can perhaps improve interview techniques. I'll then pass over to Toby, who will then talk a little bit for 10, 15 minutes, Toby, about recording, digital recording, and then we'll conclude only for a few minutes. So basically what used to happen in the United Kingdom, both Scotland and England and Wales and Northern Ireland, we used to, pre-1980s, before the Police and Criminal Evidence Act came out in 1984, 1986, when it was actually operative, we used to have a very much interrogative process in this country. And it was based very much on a technique called the Reid technique. Has anybody ever heard of that technique in the room? A few people, yeah. Obviously an ex-police officer. And we used to, we used to have something called judges' rules. There was no pace at that point. And then 1980s onwards and into 1990s, we came out with a model of interviewing, investigative interviewing, called the Peace model of interviewing. And I'm going to cover both of them very, very quickly, and it's really just a kind of a jaunt through each one because we don't really have much time to go into a lot of detail. So the Reid technique is used predominantly in the United States of America, some parts of Canada, and some parts of Europe. But more and more, it's becoming limited in Europe. Most people are moving away from interrogation into investigative interviewing. Now, I have personally, as a psychologist, and seeing what the interrogation process was like in this country, I do have some reservations about that technique. Not by the people who actually use the technique, but just the technique itself. And basically what happens with the Reid technique, they start off with what they call a behavioral analysis interview, the BAI. And basically I might sit down in front of Tracy, and I'll pick on Tracy if you don't mind. And I will then look at Tracy in the body language, crossed legs, crossed arms, stereotypical myths perhaps that she might not be telling the truth or she's being defensive. I will then decide based on my kind of prejudgments, beliefs, etc., whether or not she's telling me the truth or might be holding something back. If I believe she's holding something back, I will then go into what we would call the 9-step approach of the interrogation. And I believe, and the research strongly suggests this and corroborates what I'm about to say, is that it's very much based on the person's guilty, and that the interview is, or the interrogation is the only thing that matters. And you must get the confession before that person leaves the room. In other words, they say you must get the truth before you allow that person to talk. Now, of course, if they're using stereotypical myths about whether they're guilty or not guilty, can they actually really, truly detect truth in that person? So we've got a few problems. We've also got the false confessions. We know from our own research in this country and other parts of the world that a lot of people do actually confess to crimes they did not commit. Now, I, for one, when I was in the RAF police, I honestly thought that was complete nonsense. Why on earth would any innocent person confess to a crime that they haven't committed? But I've seen from my own eyes that this does happen. I have myself interviewed somebody through no fault of my own. I've just managed to persuade that person through the evidence I had that he must have committed that crime. And then shortly afterwards, somebody else came forward and said, actually, he didn't commit the crime, it was me. Now, as you can imagine, my detective career kind of went downhill from that point onwards, where it was actually going quite high. But just to prove that point, people do falsely confess. And there's been a lot of exonerations recently over the last 10, 20 years where they've been interviewed in such a manner, they've falsely confessed, and then later been proved through DNA that they didn't actually commit the crime. And there's a website called the Innocence Project. If anybody's interested in this area, you can actually go onto that website and have a look at various cases that have happened. Then we move on to the Peace model of interviewing. So we had the Police and Criminal Evidence Act in the early to mid-1980s. And then in the 1990s, the Peace model of interviewing was introduced in England and Wales. In Scotland, they have something slightly different called the Price model of interviewing, but it's based very much on the same principles as the Peace model. And basically what the Peace model says is that all officers or all law enforcement agencies or anybody who's using this model should actually plan and prepare the interview accordingly. Think of the questions that are going to be asked by yourself and your colleague. Normally there's two people in these kind of interviews. Think about some of the answers that person might actually give back to you. How much evidence do you have against that person, if any at all? Then we go into the engaging with the suspected offender or the person you think might have committed a crime in your business, and you engage with that individual to try and get the person to talk, to build up rapport, etc. And then you explain to that person at the same time about the purpose of the interview. Because bear in mind, we do get the wrong person in the interview room sometimes. We've known that for many years through research, and some of the people you're interviewing are actually innocent of that crime, but they will show stereotypical cues of deception. Then what you have to do after that is try and get their account of the particular crime you're interviewing them about, maybe get them to clarify certain aspects that they've said, and then you can actually go ahead and challenge that individual based on either what they've said or on the evidence that you have, or a combination of both. Then you have the closure of the interview. You explain to the individual what happens when the interview is finished, what will happen to normally the audio tapes or the DVD recording. And again, Toby will talk a little bit more about that later on. And then at the end, the officers involved or the two individuals involved in the interview will then do an evaluation of how good, bad, or indifferent that interview went. So you'll notice nowhere throughout this is anything to do with nonverbal communications or lie detection. And the reason for that will become clearer later, because there is no stereotypical cue for deception. Social psychology has been researched in this area for many, many decades, and this is what we now know, that there is no stereotypical cue for deception. So here we see the piece model of interviewing. So we have the plan and prepare, engage and explain, account, closure, evaluation. And you can see on here that you might get all the way to the closure stage. The person might then tell you something that wasn't covered earlier on, and you can, of course, go back to the engage and explain maybe something in more detail and follow all the way through. It's quite a nice, straightforward, simple, non-coercive search for the truth interview model, which is becoming more and more prevalent throughout the world, especially in Australia and New Zealand. So I mentioned about detecting lies and some of the non-verbal communication cues that people look for. Professor Aldert Vrij, from the University of Portsmouth, he's done, in fact, I would say he's probably the world's leading expert in this area. And he reviewed in 2000 over 100 studies. And he found that on average, people could only detect deception around about 56%, which, to be honest, if you tossed a coin, it's almost the same, isn't it? Either the person's lying or telling the truth. There's no real better way of actually detecting lies and deceit. But why are we so bad? That's one of the big questions. Well, sometimes we don't want to know the truth. We just don't want to know that perhaps a colleague has done something wrong, or your partner's had an affair, or whatever that might be. You just don't want to know the truth. But as I've said, there is no typical deceptive response. And we also fail to take individual differences into account. And this is my kind of area of concern with interrogation models, that we all have individual traits. We all display different signs of deception and lies. Some people go red, etc., etc. And people use the wrong cues to detect deceit. So I'm hoping this will work. I've never done it in this kind of environment before, but I'd like you in your tables just for a few moments to start thinking about some cues that you yourself use to try and help you detect deceit. And think also when you're doing that, and I say just for a few moments, are there any cues that you know that you emit when you're lying? So just in your groups, have a go at doing that. And please don't flick over the slides, because the answers are in there. So how are we getting on? Can I just pull you back together then? Could I maybe just ask a couple of tables to shout out some answers? What have you come up with? Can I maybe pick on this table?
Well, gaze aversion was one of them.
Gaze aversion. So you're looking away from that person. Anything else from anyone? So I'm kind of doing this, which is what I normally do when I'm doing this, but I'm honestly not lying. Okay, anybody else? What about the back here? Giving too much detail. That's interesting. Okay. So deflection or changing the subject. So moving on to something else and try and get them away from what they were asking. Yep, okay. So I think, most people, I normally say something that this is where I'm a psychologist and I'm a mind reader, but you've got the answers in front of you, so it wouldn't really work this way. But most people will have written something or have mentioned something about vocal characteristics, the speech, the tone, more pauses perhaps, facial characteristics, the gaze, as we've mentioned. Some people just smile continually when they're lying. Some people believe they blink hard. Some people go bright red, don't they? A lot of people have really exaggerated hand movements and they kind of start doing all this, or if they're sat down, they start kicking their legs around, etc. I'm now making myself look really stupid, stood here shaking my leg. People might actually get very upset because they think, the people are accusing them of something they haven't done. But there are many, many other cues to deception. So as you can see, here are the beliefs that people think. The voice pitch goes up, pauses go up, gesticulation, other hand movements go up, foot moves go up, posture shifts, etc., etc. A lot of people believe these aspects. And to be honest, some cases you might well know an individual in your family that you know very, very well, or in your workplace, and they might well display these stereotypical kind of myths. But on a whole, most of these are actually wrong. And here we have the only correct ones there are voice pitch, pauses, speech errors. Most people, when the line starts speaking a little bit more kind of high tone, normally that is the case. They're normally a lot more pauses, and it's, they're trying pauses as they're going through, trying to remember exactly what's going on. But gaze aversion, blinking, gesticulation, foot moves, posture shifts, etc. are normally incorrect. Has anybody got any thoughts on why that might well be? No? Something called cognitive overload. So basically cognitive, your brain, cognition, you're thinking so hard about the script, the lie script that you've got or you're rehearsing. Your body actually subconsciously shuts itself down, and it therefore hasn't got time to be doing all the hand movements and kicking of the leg or whatever else it might be doing because they're focusing so much on telling that lie. I hope that makes sense to everyone. And I think I'll bring you in here, Toby. I think you mentioned you tried this on somebody as well, and it seemed to work very well. And as soon as you asked for them to say something that was a lie, they immediately went into kind of focus mode and didn't move at all until they finished telling the lie. So this is a lot of work that Professor Aldert Vrij from Portsmouth has been doing, and he's now, I think he's something like 65% accurate in detecting lies now. So it's an awful lot better than what it was. And it's not as much as what the Reid advocates say. They believe they have an 85% chance of detecting lies and deceit, but they use all the ones on the left-hand side that we've shown through research doesn't actually happen. So we have some issues with that based on psychological research. So over 30 years of psychological research has shown that most people achieve hit rates when judging others' credibility, i.e. using nonverbal communications, between 45 and 60%. So again, almost just flicking the coin, heads or tails, that's about as good you're going to get. It's not very good. And again, many people still believe that finger and foot tapping, restless body movements, playing with objects, if I had a paperclip kind of doing this as I'm being spoken to by the police or by your boss in HR, whoever else it might be for committing the crime, has something to do with it. Swinging of legs, pulling up socks, smoothing out your clothes, picking imaginary lint from your clothing, etc., studying your fingernails. These are actually all areas that have come from the most recent interrogation manual by the Reid Associates. And again, we believe, and the research has proven, that we don't believe that in a general population this actually occurs all the time. So therefore we have some concerns. So the problem, I think we all form global impressions based on many cues, which are often, I think, and psychology would back me up on this, are very unhelpful, and we translate these into truth-lie decisions. Almost as Toby was saying earlier about, we watched The Bill, mind you, that's gone now, isn't it? We watch all sorts of other programs, Inspector Morse, whoever else is out there at the moment, and we all believe that's the way you detect lies and deceit. And most of those programs are incorrect in what they're trying to portray. So the solution then, concentrate on individual cues that have been shown to be valid indicators of deception, i.e. the ones we showed up here earlier on, and ignore the rest. I think that's vitally important, that we have to ignore all the stereotypical myths that are out there. As I say, you might well know individuals who show them, but as a general population, as we've seen here, everybody picks out something different about what they look to detect lies from individuals. So the way forward then, I think we need to ensure that interrogation or interview methods being used are non-coercive, like the peace model of interviewing. They have to be searching for the truth, not confession-based and not allowing the person to speak until they tell the truth, because we never really know what the truth is. Non-confession seeking are proved to be appropriate and especially in business, I think, are within the law of the country being used. Tactics like the Reed interrogation model are illegal in this country. They would be thrown out of court. But yet I'm aware that some businesses still do use some forms of those interrogations. And I think we just have to be very, very careful in what we do, especially if it then goes to a Crown Court or High Court, wherever in this country. The whole interview that person's done might well be ruled inadmissible. And you can imagine the ramifications from that later on. And we also have to make sure that interviewers are appropriately trained. We know from speaking to business leaders, police forces, lawyers, lots of other different organisations that the training is perhaps not as good as what we would like it to be. And I think we need to do an awful lot more training to try and make those individuals who are doing the interviews a lot more aware of some of the stereotypical beliefs to try and improve how they're actually conducting those interviews. And to be honest, when I was in the RAF police, after I received my peace training, I wasn't actually bothered whether I could find somebody was guilty or not or in the interview. If I could prove that person didn't do it, to me that was just as good as a result as finding if the person did commit the crime. It's down to the lawyers, the Crown Prosecution Service, to take that forward and let them decide if there's actually any evidence here to take it forward to court. It's not down to the interviewers. And I'll now pass over to Toby. But just before I do, what I'd like to, just a couple of words. There is no way that myself and other colleagues in psychology and in the police could have advanced where we are now with interview research unless we had techniques that Tony's going to be talking about with regard to how we can actually look through interviews and actually do research on interviews. And most police forces in this country are very, very helpful now about saying, Gavin, your colleagues, can you come in and help us? Let's improve where we're going. There's various forces I've worked with, including the Metropolitan Police, even the Somerset Police, Cleveland Police, who have said, come in and help. These are some of the issues we have. How can you advise us in what we're doing and how we move forward? And it's all down to kind of some of the solutions that Toby will be talking about now.
Okay, thanks very much, Gavin. I'm going to be talking about a new technology for the recording of face-to-face interactions. And this is something we've been working on at Business Systems for the last couple of years. We've been doing a lot of work with the police, not surprisingly. They conduct a vast number of these every year, hundreds of thousands, even millions. But really what I want to explore here is how applicable that is to the sort of people who are here in this room. There are a few police organisations here, but the vast majority of us are commercial enterprises, and quite possibly it doesn't apply at all, but I think it probably does. So that's the bit I want to look at. There's a lot of focus in this conference on the recording of interactions between us, our staff, and our customers, so call recording, and that's not surprising. In as much as business systems have been in that business for about 24 years. A whole industry has grown up about recording those interactions, and we get all sorts of ancillary benefits that we've talked about in various sessions today from the fact that we have recorded those interactions. But there's a whole swathe of other interactions we have at work in the way of meetings, which could be with customers, meetings with suppliers, and a lot of meetings with our staff, and of course the things we were talking about there, disciplinary hearings, where it gets quite serious. And these are interactions which I think quite typically we tend not to record. I think there are two possible reasons why we don't record those. And essentially that is either there is no benefit at all in doing so, which may be the case, but in most cases I think that would be suspect, or that the hassle of doing it, quite simply, outweighs the benefit. And that's something that's true to life generally, isn't it? And just about anything we do, if the hassle outweighs the benefit, we're not going to do it. And so with that in mind, I just want to have a quick look at this solution that we're going to be talking about. Now, this isn't going to be a product demonstration. I'm not talking about sort of the technicalities of the product. The product is out there in the exhibition hall if people want to have a look at it. And please do come and have a look this afternoon. What I really want to talk about is the whole concept of this and see whether it has a place here. This is what a digital interview recorder looks like, and it serves three purposes. The main one, of course, is to capture a digital audio file, possibly also a video file if you want to capture video as well. And to capture it with evidential integrity. Okay, so it's got to be reliable, it's got to capture it with evidential integrity. That's the first thing. The second thing is to capture some metadata. Now, metadata you may be familiar with, it's perhaps a bit of a geeky word, but essentially that is just a few words to associate with that interview that will enable you to find it later. So essentially we're talking about who's there, what's it about. That's it. That's what your metadata is about. We've got to be able to capture that to be able to find it usefully afterwards. And the date and time, of course, is automatically picked up. You don't need to enter that. And the third thing is what you can see here, which is what you'd actually see while you are conducting one of these interviews or meetings or whatever it is, wherever you're using this stuff. And this is essentially what we call confidence indicators. It's the information you need to be able to know that everything's working. So your cameras are working, there's an audio bar that whizzes up and down to show you that you're still recording audio. And then you've got all the information you might need, like who are you interviewing? That's there on the screen. How long have you been talking for? And the current date and time. So basic information that you might need, all on a nice visible screen. That's basically the purpose of that recorder, to capture that stuff. That's what it looks like. And you'll notice that attached onto it are some DVD drives. And that's the bit that I want to zone in on. Because we are conditioned by years of recording onto tapes, recording onto using DVD recorders onto little cassettes, recording onto physical media. And I think that is what causes the biggest barrier. That's what causes this hassle factor, which means that we're not going to, we're not actually going to ever access that file again, which takes all the value out of it. And if you think that's not the case, I was talking to a group of investigative interviewers, not police, a while ago, and most of them were recording onto C60 cassettes. And 2 of them were recording digitally and said we're recording digitally, and of course they were recording onto CDs and DVDs. Now if you think about that, you've got this fantastic audio file with great quality, you've got all your metadata captured, and you can't see it. You can't see the metadata, so what do? You write it onto the CD. And then you take that CD, and where does it go? It goes into a box somewhere, into a cupboard. The hassle now to get that thing back and play it back is probably the biggest barrier to you ever looking at that again. And actually it just becomes, you're just increasing the hassle factor actually, because then never bothering recording it in the first place, because you've now got a box full of these things that you've got to worry about. So I want to look at something that does work, YouTube. YouTube, if you think about it, they don't give a damn about the recorder, because you and I are the recorders. We record stuff and we send it up to YouTube. What YouTube does is it provides a really quick and easy way to be able to access digital media. And it attaches metadata to it. So I've got a thing which I heard at a party about some kite surfers who jumped over Worthing Pier. Worthing Pier is enormous. That means jumping about 100 feet in the air, so I didn't believe it. So I go onto YouTube, and I do a search. It's a great clip, by the way, if people want to look it up later. But what we're actually going to be remembering here, if you want to look it up later, is kite surfing Worthing Pier, the metadata that you would have entered, associated with this clip. And you get instant gratification, because you don't need to download an application. You're just using your web browser, so you can get to it easily. The benefit of actually seeing that clip, probably pretty small, but the hassle is minuscule. So the chances are you're actually going to do it. Now, if YouTube, instead of having that business model, recorded everything onto CDs, and you sent them an email and said, I'd like to see that clip about a guy jumping over Worthing Pier, and they then sent it to you in the post, and you've got to send it back again, of course nobody would bother doing it. Another example, my son seems to be cropping up a few times in this talk. He's reading politics, and about a year ago when he would start getting into this, he wanted to know what George Osborne looks like. So what do? Try and draw him? No. Go on to Google, Google Images, and again, simple metadata, George Osborne, and you get something like that, more George Osbornes than you'd ever want to look at. Now, again, if that was available in the library on a CD, would I have bothered to go down to the library, get the CD, take it to my son, show it to him, take it back to the library? I wouldn't. Is there a benefit in that? Of course it is. It's my son's education. But the hassle would outweigh the benefit, even with quite a high benefit like that. So that's really what I want to get across here, is when we are recording interviews, there are a couple of things that need to happen. The recorder would have to be there in the room. So all you have to do is switch it on. It should become a matter of course that we record this stuff. Record, just switch the thing on, record it, put in your metadata, and at the end of the interview, don't burn CDs, don't even connect the things, upload it. And this is where the real focus of this technology is. It's not in the fact that we've got this recorder. It's a great recorder. It records fantastic audio. It's all got all the, it does all sorts of wonderful things. But essentially, all it is doing is recording digital files. Now, if you take those digital files and put them on there, that is exactly the same, in my mind, as writing an email, printing it, sticking it in an envelope, putting a seal on it, and posting it to somebody. We don't, why do that? We've got a digital file that's instantly accessible. So this is what the screen would look like. You type in your metadata, Toby Sparrow, and you get your results, and you can instantly go there and play them back. Thank you very much.